actually, he set up the camera. He went inside and he said, take this picture.
Did he have you stand where he's standing?
Yes, he did everything. All I had to do was push the shutter.
Yeah,
and he still gave me that was a cover, a photo.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got credit for that. Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
Good morning, Patrick.
Morning, Matt. And Rob Wadsack, our Digital Brand Manager.
Hello.
Good to have you guys here. And Jeff Rose, our producer.
Hello.
You can email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Wow, it's been quite the week here in Newtown. We've had from 0 degrees on Monday to 50-some today, and now there are flash flood warnings because we're supposed to get 2 inches of rain.
Yeah, all that snow and ice that fell on Sunday.
Oh my gosh. I forgot my muck boots this morning, but we might need those, or an arc.
Yeah, it's a real roller coaster ride, because it's like when we got the freezing temperatures earlier in the week, it dropped something like 30 degrees in a few hours. And then
we had like wet snow that then turned to like solid ice, and now it's raining on top of that mess.
Mm-hmm.
I love living in New England. How about you guys?
Yeah. So that basically leads into, I haven't done any projects because I've been busy just
shoveling snow,
keeping my driveway clear. Yeah.
How about you? Did you finish that workbench?
I pretty much finished it. Yeah.
Did you make anything yet?
I haven't made anything. Actually, last night I was working on the bench dogs for it. So
you're making those?
Yeah.
You got a forge?
Oh yeah.
No. Really?
Are you?
No, they're just
wooden?
wood. Yeah, they're just wooden.
Come over to my metal shop. You can make some metal ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's looking nice, man.
Yeah, it didn't turn out too bad.
I got one question about your design. Why did you put the stretcher so low? Isn't that going to aren't you going to kick it?
Yeah, it's because I wanted to get some cabinet space underneath that thing, and so that's the only reason. They're like about a half inch off the ground.
Do you kick it when you stand there?
I haven't yet, but I haven't really used it yet. It may become a problem, but it hasn't yet.
That's not a hard fix. You could move it up, I presume.
Yeah, I could. Right now, it's sort of like they're glued into basically what's a mortise there.
That's not moving anywhere.
No, you'd have to cut it off.
I like it.
Yeah, it's solid. I mean, it's about 200 pounds without the vices. So, but the wheels, I mean, it moves around. It's like on a skating rink. I mean, it just moves so easy on those casters.
So how much money you have in this little project, you figure?
The casters themselves were like $80. That's almost half the cost, probably. I mean, it was a little more than $100 for the wood.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I like it. I haven't done anything either, except I made a little caddy for my canister vacuum tools for the back of my closet door, and that was all leftover garbage, basically, that I made it from. So I got to paint it now and Bondo the screws.
Wow, I've never seen like tool storage built into a regular house closet.
You know what I'm most proud about, Rob? What? So that's base trim that forms the little white pieces that I salvaged from the inside of the closet.
Nice.
Yep. Hey.
Is there anyone cheaper than me? No.
Such a Yankee.
So, I guess I did lie. I did do a little bit of a project because, we've been talking about that bike plow thing that I built.
Yeah.
And so basically what this is it's a Frankenstein machine made out of like the plow from a lawn tractor and a hand truck with some heavy duty wheels welded on, and an old BMX bicycle frame and some random other parts, and it actually it was really messy, but it worked pretty well. But the last thing I had to do to it was I had two 80-pound, I think they were 80 pounds apiece, cast iron tractor weights from the front of an old case tractor, and they're like those suitcase weights that hang on the front of a tractor. And
is that because it just wasn't difficult enough to push a snow plow with a bicycle?
So the thing is, even with that, without having studded tires, it still slipped a little bit on the ice, but that makes all the difference. Like when I first built the thing, it worked fine until the snow got heavy, and then I just didn't have the weight to have the traction. And so I took a pile of scrap angle iron and welded it into this horrible looking rack off the back of the thing for two of these weights. So that
nice.
So it weighs probably about as much as your workbench.
Yeah.
Do we have a photo of this, or are we going to put it up on the podcast?
I'll put it up on the podcast, and I'll put a link to the last time I used it within the snow. Because
So
Yeah,
I've
the video of
seen
it's pretty great.
people who race motorcycles put sheet metal screws in the knobby tires. Have you considered something like that?
Yeah, my neighbor actually built his own snow tires for his mountain bike years ago, and that's exactly what he did. He put the little the little short screws you use for
Putting
metal
ductwork together.
or for metal studs, and then lined the inside with duct tape. And you can get liners
Lined inside of what?
the inside of the tire, so it wouldn't tear into the inner tube.
So basically, they're
you go-
longer than the nubbies.
Just so that the head of it wouldn't scratch a hole in the inner tube. So you basically
Yeah,
you go
God
from,
knows you wouldn't want to get a
you
flat
go
when
from
you're
the
mountain biking
inside.
in the snow.
Yeah, you go from the inside of the tire and drive a couple of hundred screws out through the fatter parts of the knobbies.
Oh, so
And,
I was imagining the other way, which is what I've seen with motorcycles, where the head is actually on the outside.
Yeah, there's usually not enough meat on a bicycle tire to do that
Yeah.
and get enough grip, so you go the other way around.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I found something interesting on the web, and I got this from Remodeling Magazine, and this is describing DIY projects gone wrong. Right, so this piece talks about.
Why don't we have a regular feature on that?
It's like, I have to read this. So there's a little infographic here that indicates in what ways the project went wrong. Do you want to take a stab at what 55% of these respondents said?
Collapse? I don't know.
What was it? Harder than they anticipated?
Took longer than anticipated. Okay. And so 50% of these respondents said it was physically harder than anticipated. 48% said technically harder than anticipated. 17% said it cost more than anticipated. 8% said it caused damage to my home.
No, you caused damage to your home.
But my favorite was 6%. I was injured.
Yeah.
So these all happen to me when I do a project. So I don't know what I would answer.
Well, my wife yells at me every single time that I do a project. I have to draw blood at least once or twice.
It's inevitable, right?
And she's like, you got to stop hurting yourself. I'm like, no, it's like just part of the process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I thought that was pretty funny. And what another interesting thing about this is a large percentage of these people decided to take on the projects to ensure it was done correctly.
Yeah. No, I mean, nobody does it better than an amateur, right?
That was awesome.
Seriously though, we need to start having a segment on that, right?
On
We
DIY fails?
Yeah, because we show all these job site material transportation fails with plywood going through windshields, but we got to start searching out the actual project fails.
Well, so if any of you out there listening have the willingness to volunteer your DIY fails, we'd love to hear about them.
Yeah, I mean, send pictures. We'll be happy to omit your name if you don't want any of your colleagues to know.
One of my more memorable one was putting in foundation drains in my first home, and I dug a trench that was going to put gravel and pipe in the bottom to lead to daylight, so my basement wouldn't get wet. And I was about 15 minutes from being done with the excavation part of the project, and I ripped up my sewer line, my septic tank line. Just ripped it right out of the ground and flung in the air. And I was like, "Oh, that's a problem."
How about you, Matt?
I haven't done anything quite that bad yet, but I have had some trim mistakes.
Well, that's not exciting.
No,
Everyone does
nothing
that.
all
You
that
just
exciting.
cut more stuff.
We'll have to dig into our memory and of our projects, and maybe we'll come up with some good ones for next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some I don't want to talk about.
Short order in concrete.
That's another memorable one. Yes, pouring my garage slab, and I was convinced I would have a quarter yard surplus, but actually I ran out, which makes concrete very expensive. So we got some feedback regarding accessible homes, which was a discussion we had in episode 153. And this comes from Doug. And Doug wrote, when my wife and I started planning our retirement home, we wanted a house we could stay in for a long time. We researched accessibility, design, and tried to plan for our future needs. We'd already planned on such things as lever door handles. That's so you can easily open the door without turning a knob, which is hard for people with.
Makes it easier for dogs to open too.
Yeah, that is a problem, right? And toddlers, right?
and just when you're carrying groceries.
I love them. Yeah, you're carrying your laundry in, just use your knee.
Yeah, that's a nice thing for everybody, right? Yeah. When blasting forced us to resite our home from a hillside to a level area and go with a slab on grade, it allowed a step-free entry. That's something else we talked about. We have 3-foot doorways and 4-foot hallways. The one surprise with our 6-foot double entry door only allows a 34-inch entry. I presume because of the astragal, the piece where the two doors meet sticks beyond the one door, which is why it's actually smaller than 3 feet. We picked up some other ideas at home shows, one of which was to raise the dishwasher 12 inches from the floor. This makes loading and unloading much easier. That's something I would like, right? Instead of bending over to put your stuff in there. Since I was building all the cabinets, it didn't affect the cost. I also built a raised area in the laundry room for the front-loading washer and dryer. This only added a little 2x12 lumber, plywood, and backer board to the cost rather than buying bases for the machines, which are alarmingly expensive. I think they're a couple $100 a pop.
You know, can we stop there just for a second? It's like we always look to maximize the space in our houses, but I feel like some things like this, it's worth just taking up that extra space. If it makes your daily routine that much easier, whether you have accessibility concerns because of a disability or age or anything or not, it's like, why not make your house easier to live in?
Well, honestly, in my house, I have to get on my knees to get the stuff out of the back of the front-loading washer we have because it's only about 12 inches off the floor. So, I mean, like, if you can't do that, what are you going to reach in there with a stick? I don't know. A few months after we moved into our home, our oldest son came to live with us because his MS had reached a point where he could no longer live alone. This pointed out things that we could have done much better. He uses a large power chair, and it requires a little more room. He took over what we intended to be the guest suite. The bathroom in there is a little tight, and it has a tub-shower combo. We chose engineered strand bamboo as the flooring, but the finish is a little slick. Something with more grab would have been better. Zero clearance door hinges are something else to consider. Do you guys know what those are?
I don't think I've seen those.
So the one side of the hinge has like a standard leaf on it, but the other one has an extended one, and it allows the door to get beyond the jamb, so it actually opens wider. And it's a good thing if you need to make a little more room to get a chair through a smaller door. And you don't have to do any reframing. It's a handy thing.
Yeah, I did something like that with my gate to my yard. If I can't swing that gate all the way through, I can't fit the lawnmower through the gate.
He says the entry door has an aluminum sill that projects up about a half inch. When his chair goes over it, he gets a jolt. I have since learned that you could have ordered a door with an ADA compliant threshold, and that's a nice thing too. They do not keep out wind and water as good as something higher, but if getting in and out of your house is more important than that, I would say.
Yeah.
So, Doug, thank you for the insights there on accessibility. Those are good things for folks to consider. Thanks again.
That kind of brings me to maybe a point that we haven't mentioned in this is that maybe if you're looking to build an accessible home, I don't know how you would go about this, but really visiting either people who supply the materials like these doors and seeing them installed, like maybe you could find a showroom somewhere, or just finding someone who actually has an accessible home. I don't know.
I liked his idea of going to local home shows. I mean, that's where you see this stuff.
Yeah.
I suspect we'll see some at the Builder Show too, which is coming up.
Yeah, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also heard from Bill from Austin, Texas. He says, I'm about to start a 600 square foot addition drywall project and was planning to use FiberFuse non-woven tape. A question in episode 154 concerned joint cracking where mesh tape had been used, and you strongly suggested using paper tape. Does the issue refer to FiberFuse or the old style adhesive fiberglass tape? And we were talking about the old style fiberglass tape. So
yeah, because I mean that stuff, it's like chicken wire. I mean, basically you can bend it and rack it in any direction, so it's obviously not giving you any rigidity like the tape does.
No, and I would still tell you to use paper tape instead of FiberFuse in the inside corners.
Yeah, for sure. Because that stuff, the knife will cut right through it.
Yeah, and the knife will actually pull it out of the corner, I found too, which is pretty darn annoying. Do you guys have anything to add to this drywall discussion?
Just use like taping compound or all-purpose compound.
Not light
to
compound
embed,
and not
light
topping compound.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep.
So our first question for today comes from Isaiah from Franklin County, Maine. Do you guys know where Franklin County is?
I should have looked that up.
I did.
Where is it?
Nowhere.
Oh, this is in the middle of nowhere. This is like potato country, like
so
black
it's
fly
like,
country.
It's like when you go on Google Maps, it just says you can't get there from here.
Yeah.
Not to make fun, but it is pretty rural. So it's like the northeast part of Maine,
Okay.
which I think is largely timber country, right? I think it's logging and it's what you do there. But Isaiah has a question about converting his attic. Hi, guys. Love the show, and I have a question about insulating an attic. I'd like to convert my attic space into living space, and I need to insulate it. A couple of years ago, there was some blown-in insulation put behind the knee walls. There are 2x6 rafters that are spaced 2 feet on center. The floor joists are 2x6 as well and span 26 feet with a beam at the 13-foot mark. I appreciate the help because I am currently in high school building construction vocational program, and my dad and I really enjoyed the show, and we want to remodel this attic together. That sounds awesome. So I'd like to start, Isaiah, on this one. So I think you're jumping the gun a little bit. I think you got to look at the structural concerns of this attic space for starters, and perhaps more importantly, you need an egress window if this is going to suddenly become a bedroom, right?
Yeah.
You need to have a way to get out besides the main door to get out of this room should something happen.
Yeah. Or an egress door, just an egress opening.
You need
an
something.
emergency opening of some kind.
And there are very specific requirements for that, so I won't go into all those, but we will put them on the podcast sheet. But the point is that it's a pretty big window and probably bigger than you're imagining, so you're going to want to have to measure what you got there and then size a different window accordingly.
Yeah.
It needs a clear net opening of 5.7 square feet, and there are a bunch of other requirements that go along with that. But think about that.
But also,
Go ahead.
I mean, those ceiling joists that are in there right now look like probably 2x6s. I don't know if we have a
that's
picture
what
of
he
that
said.
up. Yeah, 2x6 ceiling
You mean
joists.
that'll be the floor?
That'll be the floor.
Yes.
And
yeah.
the minimum, I think, live load for a habitable attic space is 30 PSF, and you're never going to make that with a 2x6. There's
Right.
not one that makes it.
Let's
at least
get a little clarification there.
regular
So most parts of the house need to have a 40 or even 50-pound live load, right?
Mm-hmm.
That means that for every foot of floor area, it has to be able to support 40 or 50 pounds. So you can figure that out pretty easily by doing the length and width and then multiplying by 40 or 50. But sleeping rooms are allowed to have as little as 30, as you point out.
Yep. And I don't know what pitch this roof is, but I was, assuming that it's a 6 pitch, he's not going to have enough height in order to meet the code requirements either, because any room has to have a minimum of 70 square feet by code of sort of like habitable space, and
It has to be.
and the ceiling height is 7 feet minimum.
So you need 70 feet. That's 7 feet.
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah,
And,
so you
I
can
think it's also at least 50% of the room has to be
or
7.
or at least 50% of the room. So you can go. There's an exception for sloped ceilings. It can slope down to 5 feet, and I think that still counts in that sort of usable area. But you're going to have a really hard time with that that low slope.
Yeah, and I mean, existing homes, you have a lot more leeway. You know, if you don't mind the sloped ceiling, I don't think a building inspector is going to say you can't use this space, right?
Yeah.
The
And
house
it's
is existing.
And it's also going to be depending on where you are. I mean, I'm guessing in rural
In
northern
Franklin County.
Maine, he's probably
Yeah.
got a little bit more wiggle room than he might in, like suburban New Jersey.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. I'm more worried about the span for the floor joists, right? Because
Yeah.
as you point out, 30 pounds is the minimum you can do. And even with the very strongest select structural Douglas fir on 12 inches on center
Yeah.
can only span 12 foot 6 inches. So if he had the best possible lumber he could on 12-inch centers, he could only span 12.6.
But he's
Yeah.
double that span. He's double that distance between.
Well,
shores.
Well, we
we think he's got probably a bearing wall in the middle there. So
Yeah, and
13
we don't
feet.
know what his floor joist spacing are.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
let's assume it's 16 or 24 inches, and at 16 inches, a number 2 spruce pine fir can do only 10.3. So this is going to be a bouncy floor if he goes forward with this, right?
So do we have any photos of what's on the floor? I see he's got cellulose in the eaves behind those knee walls, but I'm wondering, would it be easy enough for him to pull up whatever makeshift flooring they have in there and basically sister up some taller joists?
He's going to have to,
Yeah.
or he's going to have to tolerate the bounce. And he can, see if he can tolerate that by going up there and walking around. If, he doesn't want to disturb the people who are sleeping below him, right? If you hear all this noise because the floor is undersized.
Yeah, because you think about it, the spans that we have now are certainly for strength, but there are also a lot of it, just like you said, the bounce, the amount of deflection that you're going to have in there. Because you look at older houses, like I think I've talked about before. My attic in my back part of my house is true 2x4s spaced 28 inches apart, and that thing's been standing there for 150 years.
The floor?
No, this is the rafters, but then the floor is actually 2x4s, and they're maybe a little bit closer together.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was never intended to be a floor. But
No, and that's just it. And this house
is
has not fallen down, so I'm sure
Yeah.
it's fine.
Yeah.
But one of the ways I've reinforced floor joists that are overspan in the past is it's best if you can get some camber in them to kind of arch them up with some temporary shoring or whatever. And then if you glue and screw plywood to both sides, you have a much stronger member there. So that's a good way to go. Or as you suggest, Rob, you can double them up.
Yeah.
So should we answer his question about the insulating now?
Yeah, so he's in a pretty cold region there, right? So
Climate zone 6.
so he's going to want to get as much R value out of that very shallow roof as possible.
So the code requires R49. There's no way he's getting that, right? Not in this cavity. You just can't do it. So he's going to have to insulate on top of the roof sheathing
Or fur down.
and make the joist cavity or the rafter cavities deeper.
Yeah.
So given the need for this immense amount of insulation in this very cold place, there's just not enough space for a vented attic assembly, I would say.
Yeah.
So what are the ways we can insulate this space? Spray foam?
Yeah, spray foam. He's not really going to want to fur down. He's already got a ceiling height issue.
problem.
Yeah.
I would love to see him put layers of rigid foam insulation on top of the roof deck, on top of the sheathing.
Yeah.
yeah,
And then you're not going to be venting it.
And you're not going to be venting it, and then you put some kind of other insulation in the rafter cavities, and you could have a really sound roof assembly. The code will also let you put R38 if you put it on the top side, because they described it as continuous, I believe. So,
and I guess if you can get around the ceiling height issue, we could do what we were talking about. What's the name given for that system where you do foam sandwiched in between wood or plywood to get that cavity and the thermal break between the rafters? Like if you wanted to make the cavity
Like
deeper.
a Bonfig wall?
Is that
What are you talking about?
Is that we've talked about it before?
I don't know.
Like
I don't know what the hell.
I don't know
the
what
heck
you're
you're
talking
talking
about.
about.
where you'd put some rigid foam on the underside of the edge of the
Oh, yes.
rafter, and then
Yes.
put some nailing surface, whether it be a 2x or a piece of 3/4 plywood.
That is a great idea, and we have been calling it the Bonfig wall, named for its inventor, Mr. Bonfiglioli. Mr. Bonfiglioli?
I have no idea.
Bonfiglioli. But he's a builder in Massachusetts, and he puts a layer of EPS foam on the inside of his stud faces and then puts strapping or furring strips on top of that. And what that does is stop the thermal bridging. So that'd be a great idea.
Yeah, if he can make the room to get the R value that he wants in that, but basically foam. You're not going to get a decent amount of R value of anything other than foam in that shallow space.
I'm going to go completely off the deep end here and tell him to rip off at least half of the roof and put a shed dormer and then insulate on the top side.
Yeah. And he may not even have enough height with that. He really has to measure first. Measure it down from the ridge down to the existing joists. Subtract probably 3 inches for the new 2x8s if that's what you want to sister up.
Or a bond fig strip and some, yeah.
Right. And yeah, so you're going to make subtractions for your new joists, your subfloor, your new finished floor, your drywall on the ceiling, and bond fig
Yeah.
strips if you're dealing with that. And then figure out if you got 7 feet there. If you don't, even the shed dormer is not going to help you out.
Agreed. Just rip the whole thing off then.
Yeah, then you're just going to have to build a new roof.
I think this is a good learning opportunity for Isaiah, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ripping the roof off your house while you're living in it is lots of fun. I'll tell you.
Now, I mean, those are the answers based on code and best practices. I mean, what would you assume that somebody who maybe didn't know all of the details that you guys laid out how would someone
Are you
would
asking
approach
me?
this? Yeah.
So I would leave it totally alone. I would spray foam the roof sheathing if I couldn't do anything else and hang sheetrock directly on the bottom of the rafters, assuming I could deal with the low ceiling and not hurt myself.
Yeah.
Which is not a given.
And you got to go around and close off all those roof vents too while you're doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah, he's got the baffles above his cellulose there.
And if you don't have blocking, Isaiah, under your knee wall, and you continue living with this situation you have now, you should do that because that's transmitting to the rest of the house.
Yeah, I mean, that's knee walls in attics. You especially see this in capes or just partially finished attics. One of the biggest things you got to think about in anything like this is that you have to make sure you treat a space as either inside or outside the envelope. And you've got to look for those holes that you're missing, like you said, under the floor sheathing between an uninsulated space or a loose fill insulated space and the rest of the ceiling cavity. I mean, basically, the key is to just look for any places where you're going to have air moving between a conditioned and a non-conditioned space and close those up.
We have a good feature relevant to this discussion, and I don't remember the exact name of it, but we'll put that up on the podcast webpage, and it describes a contractor, Jeff Tooley in North Carolina, who did some weatherization work on a Victorian home, and there's a number of methods that he used to tighten up this house that was... despite having 4 furnaces and despite it being in North Carolina, you couldn't make it comfortable in the wintertime.
Yikes.
You know, yeah.
4 furnaces, Rob.
That's pretty bad.
What people don't realize, and obviously HVAC contractors sold this homeowner these furnaces, right?
Yeah.
The more hot air you make, if you don't have a good building envelope, you're just pushing it outside the house. It's not. You can make all the heat you want, but it's not going to stay in there.
Yeah. When I first moved into my house, there was a ridge vent in a walk-up attic that had a door that didn't close properly, and you know, it was basically a chimney
It's a heat vent.
Heat vent. It's like.
You got to go stand on the roof to be warm.
Yeah, and once that first winter I moved in, all I did was there was no railing at the top of the stairs in this unfinished walk-up attic, and I just took a big 4x8 sheet of rigid foam and just laid it over the opening going into the attic, and
I bet it was way
It
better.
was a huge difference. Yeah.
I explain this with the analogy, like, if you wanted to keep hot air in a balloon, all right, would you take the balloon and wrap it with fluffy stuff, or would you tie it? Mm-hmm. You got to tie it first, right? It doesn't. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
Exactly. Who next?
Isaiah, good luck, man,
Yeah.
and stay in school.
Yeah, have fun with that roof framing.
He's gonna love this.
Yeah.
My dad would have not loved this. Hi, guys. I love the podcast and all the tips and advice you have. Is he talking about our podcast?
I don't know.
This is Jeff from York, Maine. A lot of guys from Maine this week.
Yeah.
I know. That's nice, right?
He's, what is that, down east? York?
I don't know.
I think so.
So is that who he is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I missed a page.
Jeff from York, Maine, you want mine?
No, I got it now.
All right.
Yeah, Jeff. Hi, guys. I love the podcast and all the tips and advice you have. I continuously learn new things from listening to your podcast and enjoy it a lot. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much. My question involves a set of stairs in an old house. We're currently in the process of renovating a historic home in Maine, built in 1892. The house was previously carved up into an apartment, and in so doing, the staircase was half buried in a wall to separate apartment units. So do you think that they were serving two apartments with one staircase?
I would love to see the decision-making process when you've got
so
a
good.
staircase and you build a wall that you actually have to run and scribe the drywall down to the staircase
good.
treads.
Further, the staircase was tiled with linoleum at one point, and metal edges were affixed to the front of each tread. Subsequently, industrial carpet was glued to the tops of the treads and risers. All of this occurred many years ago, and the staircase was definitely showing signs of distress. To make matters worse, we found that the beam that the staircase was anchored to was cut at some point, leaving the stairs floating and secured to nothing. As a result, they were drooping 3 inches and felt very squishy. We fixed the structural problems and installed a new beam and properly secured and leveled the staircase. Now, however, we have to finish the stairs, and this is where my question comes in.
So basically, just to clarify for the people who can't see, this is a staircase. You go up a few steps. There's some nice turned newel posts, and then you make a 180-degree turn to go up the main flight of stairs. And it, after years of being an apartment, it's kind of hacked up pretty good.
It's bad, yeah. So he says the treads and risers need to be replaced due to the previous abuses suffered. The skirt boards were mostly all removed a long time ago, and the floor on the landing is half gone already, so also need to be replaced. I've been looking at studying the various ways to install stairs and skirts, and I'm looking for what you would suggest as the best way to finish these stairs. They won't be carpeted, so everything will show. I am trying to choose the best method to do this right, and I'm trying to decide on the method to use to refinish the stairs. Given that this is a historical house, and this is the main staircase, and it'll be on display, I want to do it the right way. There are 3 methods I'm choosing between. 1. Set the skirt boards in place first, then use a jig to cut treads and risers to fit exactly in the space and butt up against the skirt board, hopefully with no gaps. 2. Set the treads and risers first in place and then scribe the skirt board to match the profile of the stairs, thus hiding the imperfections. After cutting the profiles perfectly.
Perfectly.
Routing the risers and treads into the skirt and shimming and gluing them into the skirt after install to close gaps. So a lot of times we talk about stuff before the show, like either in passing or just because it's interesting, right? I can't help myself. So this is one thing we haven't discussed at all. So I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say about this.
The one thing is that he's obviously a thoughtful guy. I mean, he's done his homework and tried to figure out there's multiple options that he has available to him here. And in my brief little investigation on finehomebuilding.com, I found a couple of articles. First, I saw one from Andy Engel where he was building a stair for his apartments in his house. And but I mean, this guy's already got the framing and everything in place, so he's not going to. I don't doubt he's going to want to tear the entire frame and everything
But
apart.
he could, and we could go to a stair company and have a staircase made, and then just put it in the spot.
And sometimes in
and
old
there's a
houses,
lot to like about that.
Yeah, sometimes in old houses, trying to patch together somebody else's mess is
Not
better
worth
off
it.
just tearing it out.
And a stair company, if they screw it up, it's their problem, which the part I love.
Yeah.
Yeah, or he could take on the project himself. I mean,
Sure.
But
Read Andy's article if you want to do that.
Yeah. Or get his book.
yeah.
Get his book.
Yeah.
But then I noticed Michael Patterson did an article a couple of years ago on basically the same situation right here.
Yep.
And he came up with some pretty neat ways. He basically did the second solution there, set the treads in place first.
You're
and
asking
work
me what he
around them.
did?
Yeah.
I did no research on this. I am shooting totally from
Well,
the hip
anyway,
on this
so
one.
that's what he did. He put the treads and risers in first, did some nice, I think they were oak. And then he came up with a pretty neat system for scribing the risers, which I thought was pretty cool. He cut little triangles to go on, not the risers, the skirt board. He cut little triangles to tuck underneath the edges of the exposed side of the tread and risers and screwed them in to the surface. And then he put one long stick up the length of the stairs underneath them.
They made a
and
template.
And then used little scraps of wood to tie to each one of those, so then he could then
Take that
unscrew
off,
all of those and
then
use that
put it
as
on a
one
big piece of
template.
stock and cut it out.
Where
Cool.
like the alternative, that like, you know, if you're not really thinking, the alternative would be like hold up a piece of cardboard and try to trace it or cut it, or you know, it's and I've used a similar kind of technique. I've built a couple of wrought iron railings before where I had to get them to touch down on multiple points on a series of stone exterior stairs. And I did kind of the similar thing where I just laid a stick of wood on the stairs and then used little scraps to mark all of the locations and screwed them right to that one long stick so that you just work off of that one template. So
What are you going to do, Matt? This is your project.
I don't know. I mean, I can't even see the stringer on the wall side, so I don't know what's going on there. You know, I don't know how difficult it's going to be to get those treads and risers out to begin with.
Right, and without destroying the carriage that's supporting them, right? Because
Right.
that could be a problem too. Assuming the treads and risers come off, I would do the skirt boards, right? And I do that first because the treads and the risers give you, you know, 3/4 or an inch of room to screw up. And then the treads would hide the gap once you put them in place. And as you suggest,
Routing it.
what's that?
Oh,
I was going to say, like, use a template or a jig to then replicate the exact shape of the risers and the treads,
yeah. But I do
which
like
is
his
method one he suggested.
Yeah, but I kind of like his idea of routing too. At first, I was like, I don't know about that, but I don't know. It would be a good way to possibly hide that. And I mean, normally you would have that stringer sort of exposed, and you know, you would have stuff kind of going behind that.
Right.
But that's not the case here. So.
So now he mentioned the one method where you basically have your skirt board with the gaps cut out already loose, so that you then go in from behind with shims and glue to get them to sit tight up to those joints, which is a pretty common way of old staircases being built, I think.
Yes.
And I'm sure we must have some articles about that on the website. I'll try to find the links. But that's assuming in this case, since he's up against a wall on one side, that he can get at it from below, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah.
I would be real tempted to hire a stair company. You'd be surprised at how affordable manufactured stairs are, and these people do it every day. And you know,
Yeah.
I got other stuff I can screw up.
I guess it's a matter of time versus money and how much you really want to work.
What are you
on your
doing,
own.
Jeff, in this project?
I don't know. I've never done stairs other than like outside.
It's the pinnacle of carpentry, right? It's the hardest thing that most residential carpenters do,
Yeah.
is putting stairs together.
Yeah. They're usually calling a stair guy, I think.
Yeah.
Like if you're a framer, you're probably not building
And you got to,
finished
and while
stairs.
you have this, you know, like not rebuilt, I would totally check to see that the risers are, you know, reasonably close, that the stairs don't have weird riser heights that make you trip. And, you know, like now's the time to fix all that weird stuff. And you also want to consider your finished flooring on the first floor if you're going to change that, because now you can is the time to fix that too. Oftentimes, if you add a hardwood floor, you make the first riser 3/4 of an inch different than the others.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
Do you think that was at all helpful?
I think it was helpful. I mean, you know, I don't think we gave him a
the advice-
definitive answer.
well,
I mean,
I think Patrick's advice, call somebody else, is pretty good.
yeah, I mean,
Call another podcast.
it goes back to that DIY fail thing. Well, I did it myself because I wanted it done right.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, if you're, I mean, like I said in the beginning, he's obviously a thoughtful guy. He's looking into the solutions. So I mean, hoping he can figure these kind of things out. And
I would definitely say, if you're going to build this yourself, do the skirt boards, and then, you know, the first riser, the first tread, first riser, or the next riser, and the next tread. You know what I mean? You work from the bottom up, which hides all the parts and makes them fit together.
Yep.
Okay, our next question is Nate from Parts Unknown. Hi there, I was just browsing through a house for sale, and I had a thought cross my mind. Based on the difficulty hassle of replacing interior doors, is it easier to repair/paint the ones you have? What type of considerations are there for a whole house replacement? I like his first suggestion on why you would want to replace all your interior doors. A reason to get new tools?
Yeah.
Function, hardware, appearance are all factors I thought you'd like to discuss. Well, Nate, that's a good question. So you have what kind of doors in your house?
when we bought the house, it was all the interior doors were hollow core.
Flat slabs, right?
No, some of them were flat slabs. Some of them were replacement hollow cores that
Are molded?
Like those
Yeah, they
masonite
have-
ones or
yeah,
those hardboard.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's hardboard. I mean, they're light as can be, and they warp like crazy in the summer.
But they have a like 6-panel pattern stamped into them?
Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
think they may be 2-panel or 3-panel. I don't know. They're
I
not
think
good.
generically they're called molded doors, but everyone calls them masonite doors, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they've got like fake wood impressions on the
Don't
faces.
you love the
Yeah,
grain?
like the
Yeah.
fake grain. Yeah.
I mean, there's no,
I have those too.
There's no sanding them. I don't think you'd want to strip it. I don't think you'd want to get it wet at all because they warp so easily. And I've just been going through and replacing them, and it's really not that hard to replace an interior door.
So do you use the existing door as your template?
For the hinges,
For all of it? For sizing the new door, mortising the hinges,
Well-
boring the lock set, because all this stuff has to be in the same exact space if you're leaving the jambs intact, right?
yeah, and I've actually changed some of the swings, so I've had to fill in some, some all kinds of stuff, on the jams, just because I didn't want to rip them out and completely build new jams for them. You can, but in my case, since the doors didn't fit all that great to begin with, I wasn't able to really use
That's
them
what I
as
was
a
going to
template.
say. I was like, it kind of depends on what you're starting with. I mean, if you're in an old house, chances are pretty good that there's some room for improvement from the original installation. So
Yeah, I've been measuring and just getting doors that were the size that I thought they should be, and it's worked so far.
Have you had to rip them or cut them off?
No, the most I've had to do is just take a block plane to them and take off a tiny little bit.
How's that MDF plane?
MDF plane. Yeah, no, the new doors I've gotten were all solid. So
Oh, so you upgraded.
yeah,
So that's a reason to do this, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're nicer. They don't warp. They're I don't know. There's just not enough nice things to say about them.
One thing that he didn't mention, I think, is a great reason to change your doors is sound transmission. Is hollow core doors are terrible at stopping sound, whereas solid doors are much better. So that would be one reason I would want to do this.
yeah. My house, I've got 1871 house. Most of the doors are original.
Are they 4-panel, 6-panel?
Six-panel doors, and the problem with my doors, and I just deal with it because I want to keep those old doors, is that they did like this thin paint back in the early days, and then they did a couple of layers of some
Thin
thick-
paint?
Well, I'm just saying the paint is like normal body to it. So like then there's like sometime in the 20th century, they went on with some cheap whatever, I don't know what kind of paint it was, whether there was latex or whatever that like hardened and started crumbling off. And actually, some of it might be lead, but
You don't know until you taste it.
I was very careful when I took care of some of those. I mean, most of them I've just painted over, so I haven't done any like disturbing the. But what I found is that when you sand those old doors with multiple layers of paint that's not compatible with each other, you try to sand one of those chips, and it just keeps traveling.
Oh, yeah.
And traveling and traveling. So
And it doesn't like feather out. It just like is a crater
yeah,
edge.
you just can't fix it. So I've just gone to taking light wood filler or even compound and just filling that stuff and dealing with it, smoothing it out very carefully with hand sanding. But I don't know. I guess replacing interior doors, it really all depends on what you're starting with and what you want. I mean,
I would try and avoid removing the jambs and casing if at all possible. It's a decent carpenter should be able to put a new door in an existing opening without too much fuss.
Yeah.
It's just like one of those things have to know how to do.
Yeah, we did a master in a minute on it about a year ago, and I mean, it takes a minute to watch the video.
Yeah.
There's not much to it.
Yeah, and go back a couple more years, and Gary Katz actually did an article on replacing a front door.
I identified that article as a really good one.
Yeah. It's very. I mean, he takes a very intimidating process to people who haven't done it before, and breaks it down into like
He's got
half
this
a dozen
very
steps.
very clinical approach that is just an excellent article.
Yeah.
And if for no other reason, you should look at this because he's got a great gadget to hold the door in the opening so you can scribe it to match the exact shape and out of plumb or out of level condition for the head jam and the side jams.
Yeah, and also look up Anthony Vitale on Instagram. Pro Built Woodworking, I think, is his handle. He has a really good method for hanging doors too.
I would say if you're gonna, have to mortise and prep for lock sets, a house worth of interior doors, you definitely want to make yourself a router jig, and you don't need to buy the one that costs $300 from Bosch or Porter Cable. A piece of plywood is a great thing. You use the router and the hinge to set the stops on your piece of plywood. Once you get that established, then you actually use the router in the jig to make the hole for the hinge in the jig, and then you later use it to make all the mortises for the hinges, and it is such a labor and time saver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, jigs in general. It's like anytime you're doing something more than one repeat of a single process, it's like it's no big deal. Take the extra few minutes it takes to cut out a piece of plywood and put some blocking on it to line it up with what you're doing.
You're gonna get way better results. Like mortising with a chisel is a great demonstration of craft, but it's slow, and getting an even mortise is a challenge, right? I mean, it's like that is way harder than running a router on a piece of plywood.
Yeah, some of these doors that I've taken off, like they're like pieces of paper underneath the hinges to like sort of shim them out and flatten it out.
A business card is the time-tested thing to flush up your overly mortised hinge.
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, don't be intimidated. I mean, replacing doors, if you mark them properly, you use a router for the hinges, and
there are many ways to screw up, though. When I do this, I always label the door hinge side, strike side, and before I do anything, I always think like, is this the right edge of the door I'm doing this thing to?
Yeah, because there is a bevel on one side. It's slightly out, so
so
check that.
So it certainly takes planning and concentration.
So how do you guys do the bevel? I had a conversation with our former esteemed colleague, Andy Engel, because I was going to use a hand plane, and he's like,
table saw?
Why don't you use a track saw? And I was like, I thought about that, but I didn't know if that was bona fide. And he's like, yeah, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, just make sure you have a good sharp blade, though.
And make sure the bevel's the right way.
Yeah.
Which means you have to put the track and the saw in the right direction. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've done this before just with a handheld power plane.
That's the only way I've ever done it.
And, you just have to, I mean, if you really want, I guess you could make a jig for that too. Just some blocks that are already cut on a table saw that you clamp to the board if you're not comfortable cutting it by eye.
You mean at the high and low side so you don't plane too much or uneven.
Yeah, kind of the same way you'd screw a piece of wood to a beveled piece of wood on the table saw to make a bevel cut on a table saw. You're basically making a fixed surface to lean against so that your planer is at the right angle.
Cool. I like doing that work. That's especially when they work the first try.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And there's always glue.
And if your hinges don't like perfectly line up when you go to put the pins in, I find if you just loosen, one or two of the hinges just the tiniest amount, you can get those suckers to mate up, and then you can tighten the screws, and everything's beautiful.
Okay.
You think I made that up, don't you? All right, this one is Chris from Maplewood, New Jersey. Hi, guys. I'm writing to you to ask for help about insulating my 18 by 18 foot two-car garage that I use for woodworking. I hired an electrician a few years ago to run a line out to my garage, install a sub-panel and a few circuits for my woodworking tools and an electric heater. As you can see from the pictures, everything is mounted to the brick walls. I can manage to frame, insulate, and sheathe the walls, but I generally stay away from electrical. I'm looking for the best approach to insulate the walls. I was thinking about rigid foam and studs with bad insulation. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what to do with all the existing electrical work. I hope this makes sense. Thanks in advance. So Matt and I don't know if you did this too, but both identified Mike Pekovich's two-car garage shop conversion as the perfect textbook example of what to do in this situation.
Yeah, I didn't get to read through it before we started, unfortunately, but I got the whole thing right in front of me.
His is brick also?
It was concrete block.
Okay.
Same deal. And I bring this up because I took the photo that's on the front of that article.
Sweet.
Yes. Actually, he set up the camera. He
Dummy
went
proof.
inside and he said, "Take this picture."
Did he have you stand where he's standing?
Yes, he did everything. All I had to do was push the shutter.
Yeah,
and he still gave me that was a cover, a photo, and so I got credit for that.
Sweet.
You got credit for pushing the button.
Is that awesome or what?
Yeah.
I
Because
love
he didn't
Mike.
have a cable release.
I love
or-
Mike. So what Mike did is use 2 layers of 1.5 polyiso on the inside of his block wall, and then put up. No, what did he do? He put a layer of 1.5 inch. Then he put nailers on top of that, and in between the nailers, he put another layer of foam. And I think it would work great for your shop too, Chris.
Yeah. What does he do around the boxes?
Well,
though?
that's I
Is he
think,
gonna-
one of his, I think
Yeah.
that's one of his big concerns. I mean, it looks like most of the, I don't know what the code says about this kind of stuff, but it looks like most of the places where you've got boxes, you can fur out to the depth of the face of the box and just kind of work around the boxes.
was
So
gonna
the great
say,
thing
yeah.
about electrical devices is like there are all these different size extension rings and mud rings, and like so if you have these kind of handy boxes which are meant to be surface mounted, right? You can extend those to almost any depth and work with just about any wall assembly. You know, you can make these things 6 inches deep if you put enough rings on there, and
Yeah.
it's a great way to solve problems if you don't have enough room in the box too.
Yeah. So just to let everybody know, basically he's got conduit running horizontally around the room with the metal boxes for his outlets, and then he's got a service panel and a bunch of other electrical boxes. He's
going to have to work around the panel. There's no way to,
Yeah.
to bring that out easily.
I
so.
mean, it might be just that it's a shop, and you just kind of deal with the fact that that couple square feet isn't insulated as
Yeah.
well as the rest. But also it might even be worth it if he really wants it done right to pay an electrician to come in for a couple hours and move some of that stuff.
Fur out a sub panel, right? Because all you have to do is turn it off on the inside, and the thing is totally dead. Unlike a normal service panel, which you have to pull the meter out or have the service disconnected, right?
But honestly, if you look at the boxes, he's got a service panel surface mounted that's designed
To
you
be
could probably
flush.
have it flush
Yeah.
mounted, and there's nothing sticking out the sides. The only thing he's got is one of those fancy new thermostats on a block of wood. He can just move that, and everything else could probably just be flushed up with the framing.
Yeah.
Also, since you have this conduit and boxes, it's super easy to take that off, right, and work behind it, and then install, a regular new work box in your cavity, or you could then surface mount once again on top of the drywall layer, right? So, I think this is a pretty easy thing to deal with.
Or just notch around the EMT.
That's
Now-
the hackiest way.
No, that would be pretty hacky. But he'd
But you
have to move
could,
those
and I think that's
boxes
what
and
Mike
everything.
did, because
Yeah.
Mike's not an electrician either, right?
Yeah.
Now, the one thing I will point out, though, is that he's in New Jersey. He's probably in a warm enough place where he doesn't have to worry about this too much. But the further north you go, when you insulate a masonry building, I'm assuming this is a brick building all the way through.
Yes.
When you insulate a masonry building from the inside, you have to be careful because you could start having frost damage on the outside of the wall if there's not deep enough overhangs to protect it from the rain. In fact, one thing is, you see old masonry buildings with all kinds of fancy lintels protruding from them. A lot of people think that's strictly decorative, but a lot of that stuff is to actually divert
Yeah, let's
water.
get the water away from
water
the
away
facade.
from the facade.
Yeah.
And so if you have a super insulated building on the inside and no heat is escaping through that wall to dry out and keep those joints warm, you can have frost damage in your joints on the on
That's
the
why
brick.
they suggest with masonry construction, you always insulate on the outside. So that's another option for him, right?
Yeah,
he could put the insulation on the outside and then stucco it, or put some other kind of cladding on there.
Yeah, I mean, again, then you have to also think about flashing details around windows and doors if you are going to insulate from the outside.
Yeah, and you need enough roof overhangs, so it's beyond your new wall plane. There's some stuff to consider there, but I would think about that too.
Yeah, and I mean, of course, that would be an aesthetic concern too, because if he's got a brick garage and a brick house, he's probably not going to want to put something on the outside.
Yeah.
But oftentimes in older neighborhoods, you can't see the garage from anywhere anyway, right? If it's a narrow lot, it's behind the house. It's accessed from an alley. We don't know what his situation is, but
Yeah. I can't remember the exact detail, but I mean, I've watched some presentations by Joe Stiebrick from Building Science Corporation on insulating interiors of masonry buildings. And I know there's this one detail where he'll do batt or loose fill insulation in a stud cavity, and then he'll back that up between that and the masonry with open cell foam, I believe, spray foam, so that there's room for moisture and transfer. And
So
you're not
it would be masonry, open cell spray foam, stud wall with batt insulation.
Yes.
Okay. So you have a insulation layer of foam between the stud wall and the masonry.
Yeah, so in that case, if you're going to use rigid foam, you might want to use EPS instead of
Because it's
instead of the
a little more
polyiso,
vapor
because it's a
open.
little more vapor open. Yeah.
Rob's concern is that this wall can only dry one way if it's wetted. If you insulate with an impermeable insulation like XPS, which you shouldn't use anyway.
Yep. All right. So if any of that's, I know we put a lot of details in there, and we kind of steered the conversation in a bunch
Look
of
at Mike
different directions.
Pekovich's article about converting a shop, and you'll have all your questions answered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll find some of those building science links so that anybody who's really nervous. I mean, this is a garage shop. I'm sure he's not going to ruin his walls by insulating from the inside.
That's what I was,
but
because I had the same thought you did, because, the insulating the inside of old masonry structures can be problematic, but this has never been a heated space. And if those walls are still in okay shape and they've been unconditioned their entire life, I don't know that you're introducing problems by warming it on the inside and leaving it outside cold.
And based on the vapor profile of a wall like this, it's an if thing. It's not like
That's
definitely.
what I was
it's
just
like,
about to say. Your moisture needs to come from somewhere.
Yeah.
And unless he's like steam bending hundreds of chairs, there's no moisture coming. He's breathing.
Right.
Yeah.
If he's like, drying out firewood in there in addition to his woodworking, like that could be a source of a lot of moisture. But
Yeah. If there's a heavy breather.
sweats a lot.
Well,
I really get into it.
one last thing, one thing to look for. If it does truly have a brick facade on the outside, a brick.
We have to assume that, right? Because it's masonry on the inside.
Sure. Then you look for signs of efflorescence. White staining.
Or the brick spalling.
Or brick spalling on the outside. If you see signs that there's definitely minerals leaching or existing frost damage on the outside of the building, then you do definitely have to be careful with insulating from the inside.
Yeah.
Then you want to insulate on the outside, like I said.
Yep.
That's the way to do it anyway.
Yeah.
I think you should sandblast all this brick. That would look awesome, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Deal with the cold. Put on a jacket.
Oh, the other thing I wanted to tell Chris is, insulating the walls is important, but honestly, your biggest heat loss in a garage shop are the garage doors. They are absolutely notoriously leaky. So you want to definitely spend some time addressing that. And once again, Mike's article teaches you how to make beautiful carriage doors for not a lot of money.
Yeah. Or if it's my garage, the soffit vents. I'll never warm that space.
And if you're using machinery in there and you're trying to tighten up the space from an air sealing perspective, go back to the last couple podcasts and listen to our details about that one guy with the
HRV.
HRV.
I'm still not sure that that's a worry, but
You want to talk about books?
yeah.
Books.
What do you got?
I don't know. I think Rob had something to say about it first.
Yeah, I know. We didn't. We were going to mention it at the beginning of the podcast, but basically, if for those who don't know, every year we have Houses Awards where we pick a bunch of homes in different categories and
That we think are notable,
that
right?
we think are notable, and we then, after the awards are chosen, we do a Reader's Choice Award, which basically we take remaining final entrants and we pick some finalists and then put the vote out to our readers to pick their favorites. So we got 6 houses to choose from in this contest, and as a little incentive to get people to vote, we have a little sweepstakes where if you vote for your favorite house, you can then be eligible to win $500 to spend in the Taunton bookstore. And $500, that's a lot of money
That's a lot
to
of
spend.
books.
It's a lot of books. I mean, you could spend $100 on
And there's-
the archive right off
Yep.
the bat and then still have a lot left over for other books. But basically, we'll put the link on our website, but go to finehomebuilding.com and it's the 2019 Reader's Choice Sweepstakes.
It sounds like a plug, but long before I worked here, I loved the Taunton books. Just like if you want to do stuff with your hands, like that's the place to go. woodworking, gardening, cooking, home building, whatever, sewing.
Yeah.
There's tons of stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, going back through all these books that I have collected since I started building, and I've only been here about a year and a half, but I'm looking through all these books, and I'm like, these are all Taunton books.
They are. Mine are too.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Excepting Modern Carpentry, which is another invaluable textbook for the trade. Yeah, they're all mine are Taunton books, and always were.
Yeah.
I have one that I absolutely love. You know, a lot of my work here involves dealing with code issues, right? Like as editors, we have to always look at our material under the eye of, are you allowed to do this, right? And I've gotten a little better at navigating our IRC code books, but the Code Check series is really what you want because this makes it so much easier to understand. And as a young builder for Habitat for Humanity, I relied on this to make sure that the stuff that we were doing was code compliant because it's really hard to fix stuff at the end when you want a certificate of occupancy, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, you know, there's a million little details in the gigantic code books that we have out there, but there's some basic ones that everyone needs to look out for, and it's pretty impressive that they crammed them into that pretty condensed little book there, the Code Check book.
There are individual ones for the various trades. There's also, this one is, you know, the entire code, sets of codes in this one volume. And, you know, it's laminated so like you can take this on the job site and it doesn't get destroyed. And it's just tough. And amazingly, it's $22, whereas what is it? I said the IRC books cost? $200?
I can't remember. Yeah.
I think it's $200 or $300. Yeah. So that's a no-brainer for me.
Yep.
And it's arranged by the construction process, right? So like site work and foundations, and then it's floor framing, and then it's wall framing, and then it's roof. You know, it's arranged by the way you do stuff, so it's easy to find the information you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a pretty good one. One that caught my eye was Patterns of Home. And the reason that it kind of stuck out to me, I was like, that sounds a lot like a pattern language. And it turns out that two of the authors actually worked with or
you
were
should tell
students
folks
of,
what a pattern language is.
A pattern language is a book that was written in, or at least came out in 1977. It's by this guy, Christopher Alexander. I think it's sort of like a must-read for designers and architects. A lot of design build firms and stuff probably have a copy of it laying around somewhere. But there were a lot of other people who helped write that book, and two of the people that were credited on that contributed to this Patterns of Home. And it sort of just takes, you know, there's a lot of sort of weird language, I think, in Alexander's book. The guy's a polymath. He does all kinds of stuff. He's in like...
A what?
Like he does like
What's he saying?
Computer programming. He does like I think he was working at like MIT and Harvard at the same time in like two completely unrelated fields. I mean, this guy is just like, I don't know. He's a genius, but now he's out in Berkeley. But two of his former students.
Does that mean he's not a genius anymore?
No, he still is. He's just, yeah, he's on the Ivy of the West Coast, I guess. So, anyway, a lot of the language in there was a little dense and maybe a little hippie-ish, just because of the era.
Yep.
And these guys, or these authors, I should say, sort of like put some of those ideas into a more practical
Design
context. Yeah,
design
so you can
context,
kind of like, there's still some weird language, but a lot of it is like actually very useful, and it like helps you understand. But well, it's not just understand. It's like they go into a lot of things like how to site a house on a piece of property, where to put certain rooms so that it sort of like blends in with the surroundings. So it's not just like a box on a piece of property.
Yeah.
Well, let me give a little backstory on that that kind of will help, I think, clarify why a book like this that you're recommending is
This
so valuable.
particular book.
This
Yeah.
particular
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
the Patterns of Home, which is basically the way the Code Check book is sort of a distillation of the real code books. This is sort of like a layperson's and beautifully photographed book giving examples of these patterns. And so the pattern language books that Matt was referring to, what it was is a bunch of these architects did a crazy thorough investigation throughout history and across the whole world of patterns that work in our social circles. And it breaks it down from everything from like tiny little nooks and details in a home, to how a home is laid out, to how a yard and a neighborhood and a town and a city, and it breaks it down into like what has worked to make people
Want to live somewhere.
richer lives and be able to do the tasks that they want to do and make their environment more comfortable. And because, you think about it, it's like there's so many houses out there. We build these giant McMansions sometimes that people don't find a space in the house where they feel comfortable relaxing, because it's not about size or about the details. It's about the proportions. It's about the layout and the lighting and all these other things that go into making a house feel
Cozy.
Yeah, and secure. And I mean, they've got a whole bunch of different things that they include in these patterns.
Yeah, I like that book too.
Yeah.
The original one I remember being very important to my thinking about building.
Yeah.
To this day.
Yeah, it's an important read. I mean, it's worth reading even if you're not a builder.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you're just thinking about like
Space.
building a house, or if you're thinking about space. But I think this book, The Patterns of Home, even if you're not a builder, but you're thinking about building like your dream home or a retirement home, it's a good resource to like kind of get you thinking about like what that house could look like.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I'll add kind of one more goofy book that's and it's actually a really practical book, but it's maybe not for everybody, but certainly for scavenger type people like me. There's the book Unbuilding, which talks a lot about the process of sourcing salvaged materials, of reclaiming materials from existing buildings, or using used materials that you can find, where to find. I mean, when this book came out, it's a bunch of years old. It wasn't as hip, now with these flea market flip TV shows. And all that stuff.
And everyone wants like a wall paneled with reclaimed, grape casks, right?
Yeah. And it takes a creative person to pull that off well, but this book goes into a lot of detail about ideas on where to source stuff, how to manipulate materials, and how to make something practical out of something that someone else, one person's trash is another person's treasure, basically, right?
Yeah.
So one final thing I want to talk about, and then we're going to sign out. But so we're going to be at the Builder Show February 19th to the 21st. And as part of the show, we're going to be recording 6 podcasts. And what I would love is if any of you listeners are interested, are going to be at the show and are interested in being on the podcast, we would love to have 2 or 3 people to be our every people who are walking the show floor and to discuss whatever it is they found interesting there and why they're there. And so if you could send an email to the podcast mailbox telling us you're going to be there and you're interested in being on the show, we would love to talk to you. We can't have everybody who's going to want to be on, I suspect, be on, but hopefully we'll have at least 2 or 3 people who are out there and can be on the show. It's if you've never been there, it's quite a spectacle, I got to say.
Bring your walking shoes.
Yeah, bring your walking shoes. And being in Las Vegas in February, where the high temperature is expected to be in the low 70s or high 60s, is pretty darn nice, I gotta say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
You're not going, are you?
As far as I know, not at the moment.
We'll see.
I'm gonna be on a shoot, hopefully.
Yeah, I bumped Matt this year. It's my turn.
Yeah, I'm gonna be in New Hampshire.
You've never
instead.
been, right?
No, never been to Vegas. Never been to the Builders Show. Yeah.
You're in for a treat. You should go see the Hoover Dam.
Oh, planning on it. We're going out the weekend before with my family, my sister-in-law, and we're meeting them out there. And
that so exceeded my expectations for how cool it was. I just cannot believe it.
And how low the water is now.
That is scary, right?
It is scary.
It's very scary.
Yep.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Matt, Rob, and Jeff, our producer. And thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your questions at fhbpodcast@Taunton. Oh my God, I'm a disaster. Has this show gone over? Please remember to send us your questions at fhbpodcast@Taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Thank you very much. Happy building.